guys, or several things actually. When people ask, why are the Pirates and the Wolfpack playing a noon game rather than the many other times a day that probably most in both fan bases would go to? Part A of that is neither Coach Doran nor Coach Houston is involved in that decision. It's not their fault that the game's at noon. But when you ask the game time questions, the answer is TV money. When you ask questions about realignment, right, the American Athletic Conference is losing some members. The ACC has questions hovering around it. You know, why are Texas and Oklahoma leaving the Big 12 to the SEC? The answer is TV money. Now these guys know that one of the reasons they have nice checks is TV money also. But my question to you, and Coach, we'll start with you, Coach Houston, and work our way back down. When you get a question from your athletic director or even your university president, if that happens, what is your 2 cents on just how it impacts you as a coach? Well, of course, you also know that TV money to a great degree is making the world go round. So you have to be realistic about its power, but I imagine it can get in the way of how you want to run your program at times. How do you handle it?
Well, I think, all of us, and the ADs are the ones that are, heavily involved in these talks, but I think all of us just want what's best for our institution. If what's best, take the money out of it, is I wish we were more regional. I would love to have more regional rivalries, but the reality is that's not the way it's working right now. So, but I think for East Carolina, it's just how can we best position ourselves as a university to be successful?
Yeah, I think just watching it, from the outside in, it's interesting. You wake up without a clue, that some of these things are going to happen, and we all are finding out at the same time that 2 teams from California are joining the Big Ten, and so it creates a stir, and nobody really knows what's going to happen. And I think, for us in the ACC anyway, our grant of rights is very protective and makes our conference feel like nobody can go anywhere with $120 million penalty to leave the league. And that's a big price to pay to get out. So, we feel like probably watching this thing and seeing where it's going. I know Commissioner Phillips spoke at our conference media days the other day and said all options are open, and he's working, And so I think for us, we just got to sit back and let him do what he does. There's great faith in Jim Phillips, our commissioner, and I think for the sport itself, I agree with what Mike said. You hate to see some of the regional things for these conferences dissipate. I was in the Pac-12 at one time at USC, and that's a lot of travel for their student athletes. I can't imagine being on a team that plays multiple games a week and having to travel to Wisconsin or Rutgers or a place like that from Los Angeles, and if you're playing a noon kick, and the East Coast as a California kid, you're going to be getting up at 4 a.m. your time to go play that game. So it's going to be interesting, just to see how the kids, because that's who's going to suffer, in my opinion. Yeah, they'll have more money and they'll build nicer facilities, but game day is what matters to all these athletes. That's why they do it, and that's going to be hard for them.
Yeah, I think to echo Dave's statements, I think obviously, the ACC has been a strong conference for a very long time, and it's a very regional-based conference. And there's a lot of rivalries in this league that have stood the test of time. There's a lot of things that our fan base love to see. I think we made a big step, a month ago, bringing more rivalries to the state of North Carolina and getting a chance to play Dave's guys and playing all the schools in state. I think all that stuff is great for the sport. We got to make sure that we at least protect the sport a little bit. And I think the other thing that jumps out to me with all of this realignment talk is just making sure that we don't lose sight of football as a whole a little bit. I've been at every level of this thing. I started at the Division III level, worked my way all the way through, and there's guys in the NFL from every level of college football. There's kids that are 17 years old and aren't what they're ultimately going to be when they're 21, ready for the NFL draft. And I just worry that some of these decisions that we're making, the super conference, the playoff, trying to make some of these things a reality, you're going to get rid of a lot of these lower levels of college football that have been homes for kids, that have gotten degrees for kids, that have given kids an opportunity to bloom late in their life and go on and become NFL football players and chase their dreams that way. We just got to be a little bit more intelligent, that it can't just always be about finding the best way to make more money. And I think that just as a whole, from a system standpoint, is something we gotta pay a little bit more attention to, I think.
When our ruling bodies made decisions on transfer portal, they didn't think it through. And we've got consequences, and now we're having to go back and clean it up. When our ruling body made decisions on name, image, and likeness, they didn't think it through. And now we're having to go back and clean it up with all the consequences we've got. It's touching everybody. They started talking about having a 12-team playoff, and our league was one of the leagues that voted to slow down, and what does that mean? Does that mean you don't play an FCS school? Does that mean you don't have a championship game? Does that mean that, what about finals? What about the playoffs when you get into the NFL playoffs? When do you play? How do you play? How's the money distributed? We've got to start answering questions before we start making decisions. And the same thing with realignment. When we were in Texas, they basically said we were going to the Pac-12 with Oklahoma, Oklahoma State, and Texas Tech. We worked on it for a year and a half. We got our new recruiting areas. We thought about travel. And one day ESPN jumped up and paid $200 million for a Longhorn network, and that died and we stayed in the Big 12. So we wasted a year and a half of energy and thought about something that never happened. And then I started looking at when I was the head of the president of the American Football Coaches Association, we asked all 17 members on the board to vote for what's best for college football, not what's best for your school. That's really hard to do. So right now, when we look at it, we would ask our ruling body, what's best for college football? Is it best to have 50 teams in a mega conference? What happens to everybody else? What happens to Group of 5? What happens to FCS? What happens to Division II, Division III? Because those are kids that want to play too. And if we're not careful, we have a wonderful game right now that is shared by everybody in this country. And we're about to lose that. If we go to 50 teams, those teams are going to have more money than everybody else. It's going to be like the NFL. There'll be a 16-team playoff, and we're going to lose who we are. And we're going to lose a whole lot of families. So I would say that we need to really slow down and start looking at how to make money for the conferences that may not have as much as the others to keep a balance. But let's don't do away with what we've got, because we have the greatest game in the country.
Well, if I can make as much money as these guys, I think Dr. Perkins, we need to go to the ACC. No,
Did you just ask for a raise?
smart guy, man. No, even in our level, HBCUs, they're talking about doing a super conference, and they want to merge us and the SWAC. And I think it's crazy, because I don't see our fan base traveling to Arkansas, Pine Bluff, or Houston, Texas, to play Texas Southern, or down to Louisiana, Grambling. I would love to play the regional schools here in the area, because these people that are making decisions don't know what they're doing, most of them.
Say what you think.
We always promise y'all to get out of here right